These high levels of what we then call pharmacological doses of zinc oxide in the diets also raises some concerns. And some of those concerns might be environmental related, meaning that high levels of zinc, it's certainly not all used by the pig and deposited in the tissue, so it's excreted in the manure. And another issue could be that potentially the bacteria that we like to control might also develop some resistance, perhaps to zinc or antibiotics. That might also be a secondary concern. So starting in Europe, the EU has already adopted that pharmacological doses of zinc have been banned. And here in Canada, we know that there will be some changes in legislation forthcoming as well in a couple of years. So that brings us to the issue of what should we be doing, or what tools should we develop in our toolbox here in North America or in Canada to help producers to control post-weaning diet.
Welcome to the Swine Canada podcast. I am Dan Columbus, and I'll be your host for today's episode. With me today, I have Dr. Ruurd Zijlstra, who introduced himself as just a professor in Alberta. A little bit more specific than that, though, a professor in agriculture, food, and nutritional sciences at the University of Alberta. So welcome to the show, Ruurd. I know you're no stranger.
Well, pleasure to be here, Dan.
I'm sure a lot of people are aware of who you are, but just in case some people don't, I'll just ask you to give a little bit of a brief bio before we get going.
Sure, yeah. You will recognize a Dutch accent. So I was born and raised in the Netherlands, did a Ph.D. at Illinois, then moved to Canada in 96 and was at Prairie Swine Center at the end as a research scientist, nutrition position you're holding right now, Dan. And since 2004, I'm at the University of Alberta as a professor, mostly focused on swine and carbohydrate nutrition.
So it's your 20th anniversary year of Alberta.
Yeah, December 1st. Not that I'm counting, but...
Well, happy anniversary early. So going into the topic today, and we're going to be talking about zinc and living in a zinc-free world and what we can do in that world. So I guess we'll just get started with why were we using zinc? Why was this important? And then we'll get into what happens when we take it out.
Yeah, so it's basically in the big setting is that in the swine industry, we've had the luxury of a couple of tools that we could add to the diet to control post-weaning diarrhea in the nursery. So if we go in a little bit more of the distant past, of course, we were able to use antibiotics as a growth promotant. It was very successful as a tool that producers could use to control gut health in the nursery. Another tool that from the past that people have been using, were using, is plasma protein. And also high levels of zinc oxide, particularly in nursery diets, has been very successful to control post-weaning diarrhea and gut health in general in the nursery, particularly for pigs that are weaned at around three weeks of age, like still quite a few of us are doing here in Western Canada. Now, these high levels of what we then call pharmacological doses of zinc oxide in the diets also raises some concerns. And some of those concerns might be environmental related, meaning that high levels of zinc, it's certainly not all used by the pig and deposited in the tissue, so it's excreted in the manure. And another issue could be that potentially the bacteria that we like to control might also develop some resistance, perhaps to zinc or antibiotics. That might also be a secondary concern. So starting in Europe, the EU has already adopted that pharmacological doses of zinc have been banned. And here in Canada, we know that there will be some changes in legislation forthcoming as well in a couple of years. So that brings us to the issue of what should we be doing, or what tools should we develop in our toolbox here in North America or in Canada to help producers to control post-weaning diarrhea in the nursery.
Yeah, so it's a little bit unfortunate that they keep taking away the key tools that have worked very well in the past. We lose antibiotics, we lose the plasma, sort of, and with the heavy metals. So I guess assuming that the zinc oxide is going to be limited going into the future, the same as the EU, what is one potential route that we could be looking at?
Well, there's basically two things that producers can look at. One is what can we do on the diet side? Basically, what can we do to replace effects that zinc oxide have? But producers should also look at how they can potentially change their management system. Right? So I mentioned weaning at 21 days. That's where zinc oxide is particularly more successful. So there's certainly producers that have started to, for a variety of reasons, started to wean their pigs a little bit later. And certainly the later you wean your pigs, the less of a need there might be for zinc oxide and other tools to control gut health, because the pigs will be a little bit more robust. Therefore, they won't have the same post-weaning lag. And so by changing your management, strong adherence to all-in, all-out principles, etc., are all tools that are other than dietary tools, but that are also very important for producers to consider.
Yeah, so I guess switching then to the nutrition side, one thing that I know has been coming up more and more is this idea of acid binding capacity and specific tests to measure that and then to account for that. So maybe just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so where acid binding capacity comes in as a measurement that we can formulate diets for is understanding the digestive physiology of the pig, and that in the pig, certainly when it's weaned at 3 weeks of age, has an undeveloped gastrointestinal tract, and in particular that means for the stomach cannot secrete sufficient acid to reduce the pH in the stomach to kickstart proper protein digestion. And improper protein digestion or lack of protein digestion, sufficient protein digestion, is one of the reasons that you may end up with a cascade that leads to post-weaning diarrhea. So where acid binding capacity that comes in, it's something we can measure on a complete feed or an ingredient. And it's basically a measurement of how much acid is needed to bring down the pH of the feed or the complete feed of the feedstuff to a targeted pH. And most of us, when we talk about ABC, we're talking about ABC4, and that means how much acidity is needed, how much acid do you need to add to bring the pH down of the feed or the feedstuff to the pH that is equals 4. And so we can actually put a number on individual feedstuffs. And the moment you can put a number on individual feedstuffs, it also means you can formulate a diet to a particular targeted acid binding capacity.
So if you measure it on individual feedstuffs, though, is that additive? Like, how predictive is that of what your final diet is going to have?
Yeah, like many things in diet formulation, of course, a key assumption is that it's additive, and I'm reasonably comfortable. Yes, it is. It is additive, but of course, it would be wise, and certainly if you have the ability to every now and then test diets, and are you indeed achieving the acid binding capacity that you're after? Right? We can manage what we measure, and so controlled measurement of the whole diet for a producer or working with your feed industry partner or nutritionist might be something to consider, just to make sure we're at the right ABC level. And I could certainly give some numbers as targets, but that's the overall concept, is that acidity in the stomach is something very important for proper protein digestion, and by looking at diet formulation, we can help with that. So in other words, if we have an acid binding capacity that is very high, it means that the piglets cannot bring down the pH of the digester in the stomach, and undigested or improperly protein digestion will then be a key negative result.
So why is 4 the kind of key target number?
You can realistically, you can formulate for different pH levels. That's just a number that people are reasonably comfortable with, that many people that formulate are working on. Actually, if you want to dive in the actual physiology, you can certainly make an argument that a lower pH target would be beneficial, because certainly when we think about how enzymes work in the stomach, it's more like a pH of 2 to 2.5. That is actually the optimum pH for pepsin to get activated properly. Yeah, but pH4, it's ABC4, is what a lot of people are working with.
So when you're formulating diets, say to meet an ABC4 or to keep this in mind, what are some of the changes or considerations that you would need to put into the formulation?
Yeah, so first of all, it's having a little bit of understanding which ingredients now have a high ABC4 level and which ingredients are medium and which have a low ABC4 level. So some of the highest ABC4 ingredients are some of the minerals that we add to the diet. And so, for example, limestone has one of the highest ABC4 levels, meaning it has a tremendous buffering capacity and prevents the pig from lowering its pH in the stomach. Now, other examples are some of the protein sources, either due to the protein structure or some of the minerals that can be included in these protein sources are also known to have a reasonably high ABC4 level. And to counter that, there are some ingredients with a lower or a low ABC4 level, in fact, a negative ABC4, and that will, for example, be some of the organic acids that bring directly acidity to a diet. So by changing those ingredients, you can manipulate, you can control the ABC4 level of the complete diet.
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned it already. That was going to be my next question. When we're talking about pH and acid, obviously the addition of acids to the diet or in some other method would seem to play a role. So maybe just comment on their role in ABC4 or the diet formulation.
Yeah, so the different organic acids certainly have a slight difference in ABC4 level. So actually, we did a semi-like commercial trial, and we were not interested in our trial to compare individual organic acids. We actually developed a blend of organic acids. We had 3 organic acids that we at equal content ingredient profile were added to the diet, and which were benzoic formic and calcium formate, and just as a way to reduce the acid binding for capacity of the diet. Now, other nutritionists, they may, for example, have a preferred organic acid that they want to work with, or may also have their own cocktail of organic acids that they work with. So that's why organic acids are important directly to help with control, to reduce ABC4 levels. Now, organic acids, of course, by themselves, they may also have some other benefits. Right? For example, many reasons why organic acids were developed originally was actually for food preservation issues, like you could help preserve the food ingredients a little bit better. It may also help a little bit with pathogen control, for example. So by having a lower pH in the stomach, apart from helping with protein digestion, it may also help with potentially controlling some of the pathogenic bacteria to pass through intact into the intestinal tract.
What were the considerations when you were coming up with the blend that you tested?
In our trial, we did not want to make the wrong choice of having a single organic acid, and now for whatever reason end up with something that didn't work. So it's basically a little bit of risk management as well by using different protein sources in the diet to control amino acid profile in the diet. We had somewhat similar of an approach on the organic acids. Let's be rather safe and sorry and add a cocktail rather than an individual one. Yep.
Reminds me of the amino acid work. People always ask, well, what blend? I'm like, well, because we're not confident enough in one. So we're going to put more than one.
And that's actually a very good comment, because each of the organic acids have a very different way that they actually work and dissociate within the gastrointestinal tract. So by having a cocktail, it can also be that some of that organic acid actually passes through the stomach and ends up in the small intestine, and can have a secondary benefit there. Not specifically targeted to look at in this particular commercial trial, but it might, for example, be of interest. And now we're doing some follow-up digestibility trials, and may, for example, indeed improve amino acid digestibility by the end of the small intestine, because there are certainly some research indicating that some of these organic acid molecules, they're certainly passing into the small intestine, but may even survive within the GI tract until the end of the small intestine. They're not all digested and absorbed. But, of course, they can also have an effect by lowering pH of of the systemic circulation. Yep.
Are you able to discuss the results of your study so far, or are you still in the preliminary stages?
What would you like to know about the commercial trial?
What have you found?
Sure.
Is there anything surprising?
Yeah, so what we did in the trial is we had 5 treatments that we implemented for phase 1 and phase 2. So for phase 1 was for 1 week, phase 2 was for 2 weeks in pigs that were weaned at 3 weeks of age. And then the third phase for 3 weeks, we fed the pigs all the same diets. So then the 5 diets were, of course, one was the high pharmacological dose of zinc oxide. And then the next diet would have been taking the zinc oxide of the diet without reformulating the diet. So that diet would have low zinc and a high ABC4 level. And then we created 3 additional levels, gradually reducing the ABC4 level to a very low level. So what we then observed is that for the entire trial, by taking, if we first compare the high to the low zinc with high ABC4, is that for each and every week of the trial, so either when we're feeding the experimental diets or the common diets, the pigs on the low zinc diet, they had a lower feed intake. Okay, so there was a carryover effect from feeding low zinc that even lasted when we were feeding phase 3 diets for 3 weeks. That, of course, then is, if you eat less, first law of nutrition is associated with a reduction of growth. And we also observed a reduction of particularly unique additional reduction in feed efficiency for the first 3 weeks. And then after the first 3 weeks, feed efficiency started to recover first. And as I mentioned, feed intake did not recover, and meaning average daily gain had not recovered yet by taking high levels of zinc out of the diet at 6 weeks of age. And then by reducing ABC4 levels, we were able to recover about 1/3 of the lost productivity. So we lost about 2 kilograms of body weight at the end of the 6-week nursery trial. And we were able, by formulating strictly for a reduced ABC, about 600 to 700 grams of that lost daily gain.
Very interesting. So still some other room in there, but it's like a lot of these things where you're not going to completely replace like a zinc or an antibiotic, but
Yep.
it's another tool that could potentially be used in there.
Yeah, very important. And actually, that's what we, of course, we're both researchers, what we like to see is that we each trial should give you 1 answer and 2 new questions. Right? So that's what we hope.
As long as the new questions aren't more difficult. I find some of them you're like, oh, scratching your head.
Yep.
Anyway, so getting back, I guess, a little bit more to the diet formulation. I know you do a lot of work in fibers, and obviously these can have positive and negative effects. So I'm wondering, just like, what would you recommend when looking at specific fibers or things that you found with that when trying to formulate for ABC4?
Yeah. So. Like I never think there's a single magic bullet. So it's a couple of things that people could consider for formulating diets, particularly if you have some issues with post-weaning diarrhea. And there's just a couple of things that we can put on our target list. So first of all, simply formulate for lower ABC4 levels. And people that are interested in some numbers, so ABC4 level of like 200 milliequivalents for like the first week after weaning, if you're talking about a pig weaned at 3 weeks of age. And then in your phase 2 diet, you can bring that up to like 250 milliequivalents. And I'm not convinced yet that if you're after 3 weeks, so at 6 weeks of age, so for a pig that is weaned at 3 weeks of age, if then there's still any further benefits of lowering acid binding capacity. We did not look for that in the trial that I just described. And of course, you can make the argument that by then pigs can produce sufficient acidity to manage their stomach pH properly. So, as I mentioned, look very carefully at the minerals, and I would even be comfortable for a phase 1 diet to completely take the limestone out of the diet. Right? It's a very short period of time. We should have diets that pigs are willing to eat, but we're not talking about very large quantities of feed. But then so one of the easiest ways to reduce ABC4 drastically is taking limestone completely out of the diet. We did not do that in our commercial trial, but that is certainly one thing that I know some producers or some nutritionists are looking at. Another thing is, of course, when we look at control of post-weaning diarrhea, I'm not fully convinced that it's protein level, but certainly looking at the amount of undigested protein. So that means carefully look at what are the protein ingredients that you have in the diet, and perhaps look at how much of that is animal protein versus less digestible plant protein. Perhaps not overfeed for energy. It's more important that these pigs really start to eat well. But certainly there might be a role to play for carbohydrates in the diets as well. And a couple of things to think of here. And one of them is that might be has been shown to be particularly important by some initial research on this topic that came out of Europe, and that was looking at a fiber source that would be slowly fermentable. So some describe that as an insoluble fiber. I don't particularly like that term because an insoluble fiber can also mean a fiber that is completely not fermentable. So I would call it like a slowly fermentable fiber source, and that means a fiber source that is more fermentable in the large intestine. Okay? So not a lot of rapidly fermentable fiber. So some people, for example, may use wheat bran as a target source for helping with potentially control of E. coli in the large intestine, and by having some of those fiber sources in the diet, they innately have also a capacity to bind some water. So for that reason, you may also observe a feces that might be slightly more consistent. So that is one thing to consider. Some people are also using a resistant starch. So that is starch that is very slowly digested, and in other words, may function as a fermentable carbohydrate source, either at the end of the small intestine or in the large intestine as well. And then certainly people in this antibiotic-free world have been putting a lot of things around prebiotics, which are rapidly fermentable fibers. But there's certainly some research showing we need to be careful with those. Some is good, but too much is certainly may actually make the scenario worse, and you may actually end up with more post-weaning diarrhea. So as many things, too much of a good thing can be worse. So manage it carefully, and then basically what you would like to end up with is a controlled amount of fiber or carbohydrate fermentation throughout the intestinal tract by using different ingredient sources.
Yeah. At least there is more interest and there's an understanding that fiber is a benefit in the wean pig, because I know when I was going through nutrition, we were told not to put it in weaner diets at all because they couldn't handle it. So
up to a limit.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So obviously, there are some benefits and definitely something to look into.
Yeah,
so,
certainly some people also look at cereal grains. Some people say, well, you may look at some barley in the diet, for example. We here in Western Canada, similar to what you described up to now, a lot of nursery pig diets in Western Canada, they're formulated strictly on wheat. Some people in Manitoba may perhaps even strictly corn. But from our European colleagues, we know that some of them, they add some barley to the diet, which is a source of slowly fermentable or insoluble fiber to help with control of post-weaning diarrhea.
Oh, great. Well, getting close to the end now, so I guess I'll just ask you for a final take-home for the listeners.
We know that a change in diet formulation for pigs in the nursery is coming. So very much appreciate all the support that has been provided to let us look at some tools to move potentially away from very high levels of zinc oxide in the diet. And what we described today for you is just a couple of tools to think of. And so acid binding capacity 4 is one of those tools, lowering mineral levels in the diet. Look carefully at the protein sources in the diet and the fiber sources in the diet, and hopefully together with some management tools that you may want to look at, such as weaning age and strict adherence to all-in, all-out procedures, hopefully will allow you to control post-weaning diarrhea when we cannot formulate high levels of zinc oxide in the future anymore.
Great message. Like you said, a lot of tools to potentially look at to help.
Yes.
Not only with health, but it also helps with sustainability, I think, too. It's good to point that out. Okay, well, we have 3 more questions for you before I let you go, and I'm sure you've answered it on Swine and whatever. But I'm going to ask you again for our Canadian listeners.
It's time for our famous 3. Fumonisins are one of the most prevalent mycotoxins in North America and can impact the performance of your feed and pigs. The CFIA recently approved MycoFix Fumezyme from DSM-Firmenich to help swine producers combat fumonisins in their swine feed. Protect your pigs and fumonisins at MycoFix with Fumezyme. Learn more at dsm.com/MycoFix.
So the first one, what is your favorite swine-related resource?
Oh, it's people, without a doubt. So, for example, yesterday I was at the Red Deer Swine Technology Workshop for the full day. And it's just always a pleasure to interact with people in the pork industry and with colleague researchers and learn from them and discuss with them what issues do they have and then, of course, contemplate might there be any role for a person like me to hopefully provide some solutions for those issues that people are facing. So, yeah, without a doubt, it's the people.
So our next question then is a favorite book or resource outside of pigs?
Well, when it comes to outside of pigs, and there's a movie that I particularly like. It's called Shawshank Redemption. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. So that's without a doubt my favorite movie that I more than once, I admit, have watched.
It's definitely one of the better adaptations of a Stephen King book.
Yeah, it certainly talks a lot about hope. And if there's anything that we need in our world of swine nutrition and swine production, it's hope. So it might be a link to there as well.
And then our final question is, what is a characteristic that you think that successful leaders all seem to share?
Certainly, well, if you allow me, perhaps provide 2. One of them is listen to what other people have to say. And also don't be afraid to work with people who are smarter than you. And that will be something to consider as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Well, Ruurd, it's been great having you on. A lot of good information. Looking forward to you being the host a couple more times.
Yep.
So, just thanks again for coming on.
You're welcome.